It's fine. It's fine. Let me. All right. I just started the live. This is my first time doing this. I'm so excited. Yeah, that's fine. And then just hop in my live when you can, and then I'll send you the request. Yeah. There you are. Okay. All right. We are good. You don't hear an echo, right?
No.
Okay, perfect. You're good with your angle?
I guess. Hold on. Oh, wait. Oh, the volume turned back up.
Yeah. Let me lower it again.
Okay.
All right. This is the
That's a
first
weird
time
angle
doing
for
this.
this. We good. I can
We're
look
good.
both ways.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. I'm so excited. So I'm going to press record, and then we're just going to jump right into it, okay? All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Watch Us Live podcast. If you guys are joining us on Instagram, I'm doing a surprise podcast recording. Never done this before, so if it's a little wonky, we're figuring it out as we go. But I'm super excited to have this conversation. Anna, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, so I always start off with an introduction for anyone who may be meeting you for the first time. In your own words, who is Anna Lopez?
Yeah, so I'm a proud Latina taco lover. I am a MSW MED, and I'm also a sex coach, which is where I get my where I work. Right,
Yes.
I have a sex coaching practice.
I'm so here for it. I titled this episode, Let's Talk About Sex. So we're definitely going to talk all things sex. Gonna, try to keep it PG-13, not too over the top. But, if there's little ones around and you don't want them to hear, I would definitely tell them to exit stage left now. But yeah, I always start off with every guest who comes on to talk about their childhood. Our episode is going to be based around what you do, around sex. So I just want to know, what was your relationship with your parents like growing up? Did you guys have the sex talk? Like, talk a little bit about what your childhood was like.
Yeah, I have a very unique upbringing and perspective. So I was raised in like two different households. So my parents were separated. Excuse me. My mom is German, and so I was raised with her. And I wouldn't say she was super open about sex, but she talked a lot about like my body and about what was like okay touch and not okay touch. And I had a male doctor growing up for like forever, and I like made a really strong connection with him for whatever reason. And so I refused to go to the doctor unless I could be seen by him. And she was always, so obviously, he did my physicals and things like that, and she was always in the room and was like, this is only like talking to him like while he's like checking me, whatever they do in physicals, and was like, this is only okay because I'm here and I'm saying that it's okay, and he's also a professional, and like all these things. So I remember that very vividly, and her talking about like making sure that I wasn't like walking around naked when my uncle came to visit, like things like that.
Right.
And then in my dad's household, like no body stuff, no sex stuff.
That's usually how it is with like dads, right? You're not gonna be like, hey dad, you want to tell me about the first time you had sex?
Yeah, and it was very like just like don't talk about it at all kind of thing. And so I call her my bonus mom. If I called her my stepmom, she'd probably slap me. But anyways, I was also raised with her in the household with my dad, and I don't remember her talking about it either. And so, yeah, it was very, like, I knew about it, but for some reason, I just knew not to talk about it. Like, this is something that we do at my dad's house.
Yeah. I can totally relate to that. Like, honestly, I don't ever remember me and my parents having the sex talk, like the birds and the bees of what they call it. I think when they found out, I hope my mom isn't watching the live, when they found out that I had sex for the first time, it was when they found out I was pregnant. And I was at 20 years old. So definitely not a normal conversation growing up. And I think that's super common, especially in our communities, Latino households. And that is one of the questions that I want to ask you. So since we're on it, I want to talk about it now. Why do you think sex is such a taboo topic, especially in our communities? Why is it so like forbidden, especially in like religious homes? Sex
Yeah.
is like the demon, you know what I mean? Like it's evil,
Yeah.
and don't talk about masturbation either.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's like many reasons why. I do think that they're like, um, especially well, like I'm Mexican, so I'm only speaking from my
I'm Puerto
experience.
Rican.
But I think oftentimes like the Latino culture is very intertwined with like religion, right? And so
Mhm.
many people that aren't um self-identified like religious, right? If they're like, oh, I'm not Catholic, or I'm not Christian, or I'm not whatever, right? They often have values that tie back to the church, even if they don't recognize that. And that is because it's so enmeshed, like it's very hard to like separate the two, right? And that even happens here in like the United States and like American culture. But I think that the Latino culture is very intertwined with religion and things like that. And so the messages that the church gives about sex is oftentimes that it's dirty, don't do it, things like that. And I think the intention behind it, I mean, I'm sure there's many intentions, but
Yeah.
the main intention behind it is to not get not to entice like people that aren't married to like have sex and to go down this path and all these
Right.
things.
Right.
I always thought that was really weird because I don't think that we should be blaming sex or anything else for that matter for our quote unquote sin, right? Like we need to take accountability. And I think that that's something that isn't taught a lot. But so yeah, I think that oftentimes the church is like, oh, don't do this because it's really dangerous. If you go down this path or if we talk about it, it's going to entice them to want to have sex. And then they're going to be having orgies and like, I don't know,
Right.
whatever, right?
It just has to go
And
to like the extreme.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
what people don't realize, especially like people that aren't professionals, like in the sex field, is they don't realize that you can have sex ed conversations that are not like quote unquote dirty, right? Like you can talk about consent, you can talk about your body. Like to me, that is not dirty. I mean, sex isn't dirty either, but I realize that I have different views than other people. And so
Yes.
what I'm often talking about with my clients is like, if you believe that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, that's totally fine. I'm not going to tell you that you can't have that belief, but
Right.
it's the way that you talk about it that then creates like this shame and this guilt. And like oftentimes parents are like, okay, no sex, don't do it. Like that's all you hear about it. You don't learn anything because they think it's going to entice you to do it, even though studies show the opposite, right? And then they go to get married and they still have the shame and the guilt and they wonder why. And it's because like it's not a light switch. You can't you don't just get married and it's like, okay, no more shame and guilt. Like that's not how that works. And our parents kind of forget that that's probably the same exact thing that happened to them, but they're so in it that they don't realize like, oh shit, maybe I should change, right? Like maybe I should try something different.
Yes. I love that. I talk a lot on my podcast about breaking generational trauma and, not just talking about trauma, but like things like sex, like normalizing the conversations. Like I said before, that wasn't normal for me. I don't think my sister even had that talk with my parents either. And I have a 12-year-old, she'll be 13 in like less than a month. And I had the sex talk with her, and it wasn't uncomfortable. Well, maybe it was uncomfortable for her, but for me, I was going to be like, no, somebody needs to break that cycle. And I want her to be informed. I want her to be aware. I want her to be able to make her own decisions, and not have this shame or this guilt that we grew up with. And there's something that you said that stuck out to me. I was putting together the questions yesterday, and I looked on your link tree. You had this video talking about consent, and the way that they explained consent in that video, it was so refreshing to hear. And for someone to compare making tea to consent for sex, like I love that so much. So talk a little bit more about the consent.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we think that we teach our kids consent, or like we just kind of assume it's like, yeah, if you don't want to do it, say no. And on the same hand, especially in Latino households, we're like, no, you have to kiss everybody goodbye. You have to hug them goodbye or to say hello or whatever.
Yes.
And I was just like arguing. This is so bad. I was just arguing with somebody about this on TikTok about how we're so, as parents, people are so authoritative, and it's like, oh, do as I say, right?
Yep.
But that actually puts your child more at risk to become assaulted. And so it's super important when we're teaching consent to children, which it should be taught to children. Like, I mean, it can be taught to adults as well, but it's super important to teach them as their children. But like teaching them that their body is theirs. It's not yours. So if they don't want to do something with their body, they don't have to. You cannot teach a child, hey, you have autonomy over your body, but when grandma tells you you have to kiss her, then like you have to kiss her. Like that's mixed messaging.
It's counterproductive. It's like
exactly.
Yep.
It's kind of like do as I say, not as I do, or do as I say, not as I do. And we know that that doesn't work, even though for some reason we continue doing it, right? Exactly. And so it's like, if the child feels comfortable, they are going to hug and kiss grandma or whoever it is, right? And so it's really about like, would you rather your child know that they have autonomy over their own body, or would you rather worry about what your mom says?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really important for us to ingrain that in, you know, this generation. Like I said before, that we need to break the cycle of, you know, no means no. And if I don't want to touch you, I don't have to fucking touch you. Like me, I'm not a touchy-feely person. Like, just stay out of my bubble, okay? Don't fucking touch me unless I want to touch you.
Yeah, that's actually something. Oh, sorry. I was I was just gonna say that makes me think about something that I've been talking about a lot too. That has to do with like Latino households and like the authoritarian, you know, type thing. Is that we're often taught that to respect our elders. I think that is the most beautiful thing. One of the most beautiful things about our culture, and I think we take a step too far. We're like, whatever they say goes. Don't question it. Don't ask me questions. Children are curious. They want to know things. And oftentimes when they're asking you why, or they're asking you questions about decisions you've made, it's because you're not telling them anything. You're just like, no, and that's it. And they want to know. Think about how anxious you are when other people are making decisions for you. Like, they're curious because maybe they don't feel like there's like this safety net for them, right? It's not created because you're just randomly making decisions because you want to make decisions, and you can because you're the adult. And so when you are raised in a household where you're not allowed to ask questions, you grow up and you don't seek outside information. You don't become a critical thinker, or critical thinking doesn't come easy to you because you weren't allowed to ask questions. So then it's like, oh, well, if I learn more information about my body, for example, and it contradicts what my mom says, even though logically, you know, you're not going to get in trouble for seeking out this information, she probably doesn't even know, you still make that association, and becomes this automatic response in your body because it's something that you've done for years at this point. And then we wonder why, like, oh, I don't ask questions, or I can't say no when I don't want to have sex to my husband. And we often think it's like, oh, because we're not supposed to, or whatever. And it's like, no, because you literally feel scared that like you're going to get in trouble if you kind of question what someone else says. And it's because you were raised this way. So it's ingrained in you.
Yes. I talk about this all the time. Like, this is why I always love starting off with going back to childhood and talking about those things that people have experienced growing up, because we a lot of times don't realize how much it shapes us into who we are today. And like you said, those things that we were taught growing up, they can end up being people pleasers, you know, yes men. Like you said before, you can be, unfortunately, a victim of assault. And, you know, it is uncomfortable to talk about, but we need to have these uncomfortable conversations if we want to change the narrative around it.
Right. And I think that oftentimes parents are like, oh, talking about sex with my kids is so weird. But like, if you talk to them before they have any idea what it is, it doesn't sound that attractive. Like, oftentimes we try to talk to our children when they've already heard things. So now it is awkward, but then you're also being awkward. So then they pick up on that. So then they're awkward, right? Like, if you're confident and like knowing what you're going to say and like how to have these conversations, it's not going to be like that awkward. But if you're having it with your child, like that's, you know, younger, they don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're sexualizing it, like you're making it awkward, not them. Because if you think about like the most basics, like if we're talking about like cisgendered heterosexual sex for a second, and you're like, oh, okay, so you know, the man is gonna put his penis in the vagina, like that does not sound attractive. They're
no, it
like,
doesn't. Like, what? Like, I don't want that anywhere near me.
Right. The only reason that you as the adult think that it's weird is because you know what it feels like. You know
Right.
what it is. Like, you have all this backstory to it.
Mm.
They're coming from a clean slate. They have no fucking clue what you're talking about. They probably barely know what the opposite sex genitalia looks like.
Yes. Do y'all hear that? Whoever's watching on Instagram and whoever's listening, we are the fucking problem, okay?
Once again.
Once again. So let me piggyback on you know, this part of the conversation. Do you feel, in your professional opinion, is there like a certain age that we should start having these sex conversations with our kids? Like, talk about that a little bit. And how can we have these conversations without making it feel icky? Like, what would be some things that we would be able to say?
Yeah, so I definitely think it starts out with educating yourself, right? And making sure you're checking your sources. Like, I'm all for Google. That's great. It's a great place to start. And you want to make sure that you're not just getting random information off of like places. There are plenty of places that you can go to get information. Scarleteen is actually a website meant for teenagers. But if you need to go there, like you want to go back to the basics, go there. Planned Parenthood has plenty of information, right? Like, going to reputable sources, not to like Cosmopolitan or to like your Resina or wherever, right? And getting your information from there. You also want to think about sharing like information, right? You're not sharing your experiences. You most definitely can if you're comfortable and they want to ask you about that, but you're sharing information to begin with, right? To talk about this. So I think that the more confident you are in what you're talking about and the functions of the body and things like that, because it's not just the act of sex that you are talking about. You're talking about consent. You're talking about your body, the functions of your body, right? All those things. And then we can talk about sex. We can also talk about relationships that maybe don't involve sex, things like that. So I think that the more educated you are, the more confident you will be in like having these conversations. And I say educated in like, you have the information. I'm not saying you have to go out and get a degree like I did about sex. Like, you can still teach your children these information. This information. I also think like knowing where your household stands, like your values and your beliefs around sex and sexuality, and kind of sharing that like these are beliefs that we have, not necessarily everybody has those, like whatever those are. Going back to the example about premarital sex, right? I think also keeping in mind, especially when you're talking to like a teenager, or maybe even a young adult, right? Or maybe like a preteen, they're going to do what they want to do regardless. We cannot, as parents, be like, okay, I'm going to tell you all this, and then you're not going to have sex. Like, you can hope that they don't have sex and they wait until they're comfortable and they're safe to an older age, whatever. You can hope all you want, but they're going to do what you want to do. These conversations are not meant to manipulate your children. They're meant to give them information and trust them to make an educated decision. This is why we provide our children with information to begin with. So going back to like the main question is, when do we start? I think that it can start as early as they understand you. I think it can start with modeling positive sexual behavior, positive like self-talk about your body, about sex in general, about relationships, modeling that, because they're going to pick up on that more so than what you say. I mean, yes, they're also going to pick off what you say, also what you share with them, but they're going to notice like the discrepancies between what you say and if you're doing something entirely different. So really embracing that, like your beliefs and your, you know, however you want to approach sex, and just modeling that for them, because I think that that's super important. I also think talking to them about their body, not using pet names, because that oftentimes can, one, it puts them in a place where they're more likely to be assaulted, but also because like it's putting shame around it. Like if it has to be like a quote unquote secret, or it has to be like, we can't talk about it, like that thing that shall not be named, like, no, it's a part, like you're sexualizing it by being like, oh, we're going to call this a chocha instead, right? Like, no, it's a vulva, it's a vagina, right? Like they're talking about their parts is not, there's nothing wrong with that. Also talking about consent, and that means consent in all places. So this is a lot of work for the parents, but like, you're a parent, you decided to be a parent, this is this is what you get. So,
you decided to be grown, right?
Right. You wanted to have sex. No. So it's really about like, you know, not only teaching them consent, but then, you know, showing how that is modeled, right? Being like, okay, like I'm your protector for this time being, like while you are a child. And if someone is, say, like tickling you, like say Theo's tickling you and it's totally innocent, but she's like, you know, your daughter or your son is like, you know what, I don't really like this, but they don't feel comfortable and confident being like, hey Theo, I don't want that to happen or whatever, then you as a parent need to have that conversation with your brother or brother-in-law, whoever it is, right? Yeah. And so teaching consent, teaching about the body, teaching about the differences between different bodies, because all bodies are different. And then talking about, you know, your morals and values. And then as they get older, you know, talking about like the act of sex. I think talking about your period, like that's also a sex conversation. Yeah. What I think is also happening is that oftentimes we have sex conversations and we don't realize we're having sex conversations. When you tell your child that strangers should not be touching them in their private parts, that's a sex conversation. And so give yourself more credit than what you already are, because you are having these conversations. You just don't realize that you're having them.
I love it. I'm so here for this episode. I really want it to be like informative, educational, but also like easy to understand. So if anyone needs any more help or assistance, you can always work with this beautiful queen right here. I want to know, what made you want to become a sex and life coach? Talk about what that journey looked like for you.
Yeah, so my earliest memory of talking about sex was with these neighbor girls. Like they lived across the street from me, and so it was their dad's house. So they would come like every other weekend or something, and they would always come over because I had a swing set, and we would like talk. And I always remember telling them about sex, and I don't know what I was saying. I wish I could remember. Oh my gosh, I would pay big money to remember. I don't remember what I said. Pretty sure it was inaccurate, whatever I was saying. I have no idea. I don't know if I was like being nosy and overheard something from like my older brother, or no idea. But anyways, I was sharing like with them about sex in some way. And so since then, I've always been super interested in like sex and like the act of sex and the things that different people liked. And I know that's really weird for a child to be into it, but
no, hey, you are who you are.
That's what it was, right? And I think it started out by being really interested about the body and like the functions of it. And I've always been very like walking around the house nude, like very interested in bodies and how they're different and how they look and like the functions of the body and all those things. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, I want to be a sex ed teacher, because, you know, we had sex ed in like junior high, I think. And I was like, I would love to do this. And then, but it was like my math teacher or like my health teacher or my PE teacher. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to I want to talk about sex and like all the things, right? And it wasn't just the act of sex, which is how I noticed I was different from like my friends. Like I was like, no, like I'm actually interested in this in like a non-sexual, like like, you know, I guess perverted way, the way that they were like all giggly about it. And I was like, no, like I'm really interested in this, just like you're interested in, I don't know, fucking marbles or whatever it was, right? I was just super interested. And so then when I got to college, I was like, well, there's not a direct path to be a sex ed teacher, right? Like, if you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school. If you want to be a nurse, you go to nursing school. You want to be a teacher, you go to school to be a teacher.
There's not like a sex curriculum.
Right, exactly. And I was like, okay, well, what degree do I get? Like, that's weird. So I ended up getting into psychology because I was like, I'm super interested about how the mind works. And so I was on the path to get a BA in psychology. And I took a human sexualities class, which is actually a psych class. And so I talked with a teacher and she was like, oh yeah, you can become a sex therapist. And I was like, sold. So I was like, I finished my bachelor, and as I was finishing my bachelor, I realized that I was going to have to go on to either become a marriage and family therapist or become like a licensed clinical social worker. And so I realized as I got into it that I didn't just want to do therapy. Like I really liked clinical social work. So for those of you that are maybe contemplating between the two, marriage and family therapy is mostly therapy, and that's kind of all you'll be doing. Whereas licensed clinical social worker, you have a lot more doors open to you. You can work in like nonprofits, and you can be a therapist, but you can also do many other things. And because I like to do all the things, that's the way that I went. It's also centered in like oppressed populations. And so that's what I was really interested in, specifically because I wanted to work in the Latino community. So I found a program that was like a Master's of Education in Human Sexualities. and a master's in social work. And I was like, this is perfect. So I started there, and I actually had to do an internship. I think it was my second year in school. I had to do an internship. So I did an internship at like a nonprofit, and they do health coaching there. And so I really saw like the coaching dynamic, as far as like life coaching goes. And they were considered health coaches, but I mean, same. Right. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is so much, I don't want to say so much better, but so much more like my vibe of talking to these people. And as I started, I was like, well, I'm going to finish my degree because I'm already in it. Like, I'm going to finish it. So I went ahead and finished, and I graduated in December.
Congratulations.
Thank you, which is why I have 6 letters after my name now. But anyways, so I was like, you know what? I really don't want to sit for the boards. Like, I have a background in counseling. I actually did another internship where I was, providing therapy to children. And I was just like, this is not my thing. Like, you have to diagnose people in order to charge them. It's like this whole thing. And I was like, therapy is great, and this is not what I want to do. So I decided to stick with coaching. And I was like, I definitely think that I can make an impact. And like, from a very young age, I don't remember, maybe high school, junior high, I was like, I want to reform sex ed. Like, not only did I want to work in this space, but I wanted to reform sex education. And I was like, oh, this is the way that I am reforming it. Like, it doesn't have to look like this, cookie cutter way. Like, this is the way that I am reforming it. I am meeting my people where they are and reforming it from like inside the house versus like the systemic kind of thing.
Yes. I'm so here for it. I really love what you're doing. It's so niched and so necessary, especially in our communities. Like I said before, it's such a taboo topic that people are scared to talk about, but they secretly like really do want help, from professionals like you. So I'm curious to know, and you don't need to name names or anything, but do you have a particular story of a client that sticks out to you that was, in a really shitty place, and with your help they were able to like blossom into something beautiful? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I have so many stories, but I think this one's my favorite.
Yes.
So, any of my clients listening, sorry, I love you too. But I had a client come to me who was really struggling. So she had a child already with her husband, and she was trying to get pregnant, and she just couldn't get pregnant. And so she was like trying. So finally she hired me, and there was a lot of blocks around, like, it was to the point where she didn't even want to go to the doctor to see if anything was wrong with either her like egg count or something like that, or with her husband, because she was just so scared. She was like paralyzed. And so we started working together, and she actually was going to make the appointment to see her doctor. And it was like months out. Like, for some reason, her doctor was like really booked. But while she was waiting for that appointment, she actually got pregnant. And we were like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so we continued working together. And so she ended up actually losing the baby. It was about, I want to say like 4 or 5 months in. So it wasn't just like right away. So she ended up losing the baby. And she was like posting her kind of like her process through the grief, like, and kind of like, not like overtly, it was very just kind of like posting things on social media. And so of course I was following, and she was like filling me in about, the process of having to like have the fetus removed and like all these things. And she was like taking it like a fucking rock star. I was like, I don't understand like how you're standing right now. And she was just like, I've just been using the tools that we've been working on. And because she already had that solid foundation, she was able to then like take that into this place of grief. And in my mind, grief never goes away. So it's like she's continually using them and just kind of like up leveling those tools that she's like taken in. And so, her and her husband, and in her child even, are working through this like grief together using the tools. And there came to a point where they're like, maybe we need to separate, like this isn't working. And so now she's working like with her husband to kind of like strengthen their marriage, and using those same tools to like strengthen her marriage. And was like, you know what, if we do decide to separate, like I'm gonna be good regardless. And like, I wish him no ill will. Like, he's the father of my child, and like, we're gonna do this. And like, and there was one point where she thought she was pregnant. And so, like, I think it was like last month, And so she took a pregnancy test and she's like, it's negative. She was like, this would have broken me before. She was like, but I was just like, okay, like I got this. And like to see the change in her is mind blowing. I'm like,
you out here changing lives, girl. I'm so here for it. I'm so here for it.
Yeah.
I love that. And, you know, like I said before, I think what you're doing is so powerful, and it's really something that's definitely needed, especially in our communities. So I just want to pull out some more gems from you. So keep your coaching hat on. All right. So let's say you're in a relationship with a partner and they're not satisfying you in your sex life. How can we talk to our partners in a healthy way that's not going to offend them, that's not going to spark a fight, that's not going to end up breaking up? Like, how can we really tell this man or this woman, like, you're just not doing it for me?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. Go off, girl.
Like, how much time you got? No. Yeah, so I always say that pleasure is the individual. I'm like rolling away. The pleasure is of the individual, right? So like if you are having sex with someone, your pleasure is your responsibility, their pleasure is their responsibility, and anybody else that is involved.
It's your responsibility.
And the reason for that is because we allow ourselves to relax enough to feel that, right? And so often, I know that sounds fake, but hear me out. So there have been times when you've had like amazing sex with a partner. You're like, I don't know how this could get any better. Like that was the shit. You're still thinking about it the next day, the next week, right? It was amazing. You could have sex with that very same person maybe a month later and you're pissed off at them, or you're just pissed off in general, maybe not even at them. And you're like, that was not like, we could have just not done that.
It's happened.
Right. You're like, I could have just stayed watching Netflix. Like, why? Like, why did I shower for this? Or like, whatever, right? And it's because it has to do with your mindset and like the place that you're in, right? And it's not that you're like thinking negatively or, you know, whatever, but it's because if you're stressed out and you're in this like activated, like fight or flight response, your body is not going to be like, hey, now's a great time to become aroused, because it thinks you're like running from a lion, right? You know, we evolved from like, now we're in modern times, right? And that lion is just like this stress that you have because your boss is annoying or whatever, right? And so, you know, pleasure does come from us is what I want to start with. So regardless of like how fun, you know, your partner is or how much pleasure they're receiving or, you know, whatever, like your pleasure is your responsibility. Like you could have some bomb ass sex and they'd be like, that was shitty. And that's fine. Like, that is totally fine because it is on them. And I'm not saying that you cannot please your partner. But what oftentimes happen, especially amongst those of us that have been socialized as women, we're like, oh, well, I really enjoy pleasing my partner. But it's not because you enjoy like sucking dick or whatever, right? Like it is because you're like, oh, well, if they have a good time, then I'm good, right? Like it's about that. It's about what you think about yourself, and you're so worried about what they're thinking versus focusing on you. So I'm not saying that you can't please your partner, but think about the thinking behind that. Why is it that you only want to do that? Are you embarrassed about your body? Are you embarrassed about your smell, the way you look, like whatever it is, right? So think about why you want to do it, right? And there are some people that really do enjoy giving, and that is totally fine. But what is more important is the intention behind it. What are your ulterior motives? Because everybody is super egotistical. We do it because of us, and that's totally fine. That's just how humans are.
Speaking facts.
Yeah, and so I would say to those of you that are having sex and you're like, this sucks, like think about what is it that you do want, right? And the things that you don't want, because oftentimes we don't know. We're just like, this isn't working, but I don't know what it is. We'll pinpoint it. Because if you're just having a general conversation with them, like, hey, this isn't working. Okay, well, what are they supposed to do with that? That's like telling someone like, oh, hey, I'm in California and I want to go to Florida, and you go that way. Like, they're going to get lost. You need to give them specific directions. And I know that there's like this trope that like men, you know, you have to tell them, explicarlos with, you know, apples and oranges or whatever, right? But no, that's anybody. Like if they just told you to go in a general direction, it's going to take them a lot longer to figure it out than if you told them like, hey, no, I actually would like you to go down on me more and less of this other thing that you're doing. Like whatever.
Communication, people.
Right? Yeah. So really figuring out what it is you like, what it is you don't like. And oftentimes that involves like self-exploration. So this can be in a sexual or a non-sexual way. Like If you want to masturbate, by all means, go ahead and do it. But what I would say is that do it with your own two hands. Don't bring in external things, because you're trying to figure out what it is that you like and what you don't like. So once you figure that out, then you can have a conversation with them. So I always say that you should have conversations about sex outside of the bedroom.
Yes.
It's a lot safer. it's just easier for everybody.
Yes.
And so asking for consent, or we were talking about consent earlier, asking for consent to have the conversation. Hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. Is now a good time? If they say no, you need to honor that no, and you need to set a time to have that conversation with them. So they're like, no, it's not a good time. Okay, Friday at 2 p.m. Like you two figure it out, whatever it is, have the conversation then. If they say yes, then you can have the conversation right then and there, but definitely honoring that no. In the bedroom. If something is happening, you know, you don't always like the same thing. Like sometimes maybe your breasts are sensitive because it's like closing, you know, near your menstrual cycle or whatever it is, right? You can say like, hey, I really like when you do that. And I would like it even more if you did it in this other spot. Like that same thing. You could do that same thing, but in a different spot. Or maybe I like you playing with my breasts, but can you do it in a different way? And tell them. And then affirm that, like, yes, that is exactly what I wanted. Like, thank you, right? Yeah. And so it's like not being like, hey, can you not do that? Or like if something hurts and like you yell at them or, you know, whatever it is, right? Just redirecting, just like you would with a toddler that is playing, I don't know, say they got a knife or something and you're like, hey, let's get these keys, right? It's redirecting them. And not because we're treating them like children, but it's like, it's very abrupt to be like, hey, stop, right? And of course, if there's like a full-on stop that needs to happen, then that is totally fine. Yeah. Feel like empowered enough to do so. But if it's just something that's like you're uncomfortable or like, hey, I need to move over, there's a way to do it without being like full stop, like let me move. Right. You know?
Don't do what I did one time and just slap the shit out of them. Like, stop doing that right now. That totally killed the vibe. Right? You know, I was younger, I was immature, but you know.
It happens.
Yeah, it happens. It is what it is.
And I would also say, like, don't just sit there and take something that you're not liking, that you're uncomfortable, even you're in pain, because you're like, oh, I don't want to ruin the moment. Like, you're ruining the moment anyways for yourself. So why does it matter? Yep. So I would really encourage people that do that are listening to this, like, really to consider, like, why is it that you do that? Why is their pleasure more important than yours?
A lot of mind work as I'm listening to this conversation, like you said, everything starts and ends with us, and we need to, you know, not be ashamed to want to speak up and have these uncomfortable conversations. Like I said, I'm so here for it. This is so good. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Who's watching on Instagram? Okay, so I want to talk about cheating, infidelity, something that happens a lot. Unfortunately, I have been, you know, a victim of that. So I want to know, can we really recover after, you know, dealing with that, with, you know, a cheating situation? Can the sex life get back to normal? What happens when those roadblocks come up, you know, lack of trust and all that? Talk about that a little bit. And I'm sure you've dealt with clients who have experienced that as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's possible. I think that we can get over anything. I think there's like this common misconception that it's like, oh, well, if it's cheating, then like maybe. And if it's this other thing, then like never. You can never. Like if there was a baby, then never. You can never recover, right? And I don't think that it's like a one size fits all. I think it's like if you decide that you are going to get past this and you want to forgive that person and also stay with them, because you can forgive them and not stay with them, right? Because it's not, the forgiveness is not for them, it's for you. But I think it's possible, right? I was just having this conversation the other day, and, you know, if someone cheats in a relationship and the other person decides to stay, then you cannot say that you forgave that person and continually bring it up or continually base your decisions or your actions off of that cheating thing. Because once you said that it was forgiven, and it's not just about saying it, I think that often happens too. Oh, I've forgiven you, but then your actions show otherwise. Like, no, you have to actually truly forgive this person, not only for you, but for the relationship, if you're going to stay, and like for them as well, right? Like, if you're going to stay, then you have to actually experience like true forgiveness and as if it never happened. Just like if someone accidentally bumps into you at the grocery store and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. You're like, oh, no, that's cool. Like, don't worry about it, right? You're not thinking about that 5 days later, right? And like wanting to go knock on their door because they bumped into you at the grocery store.
Right.
So
I mean, some people are a little that crazy.
Right. I was thinking
that's the exception.
I'm like, they're like, I need the security cameras. Yeah. And so I think it's really important that, like, if you are going to stay, then you need to be ready to fully forgive that person, because if you're going to continually bring it up, then there's no point in you staying. Like, you can say if you want, like, it's not my relationship, but think about, like, why is it so important for you to stay? Is it because if it was a marriage, for example, is it because you were taught that divorce is bad, or what are people going to say, or like all these other things, right? Or like, you know, you have a kid, and so what does that say about you as a mother, and like all these things, right? Like, are you you're probably catastrophizing, right? So it's like, oh, it all ends up with you being single with like 10 cats, right? And your children, or something like that, right? And so really think about, why are you so like, if you don't want to forgive this person, why are you so married to this person, right? And not married in the sense that like your husband and wife or whatever, right? That you're just like, you won't let it go regardless of what happens. And really thinking about, like, what are you afraid of if you do become single? Because you were single before, so what's the difference now?
Yes, a lot of mind work. I know for me personally, like, being that I've dealt with cheating in the past, I know for me now, after doing, you know, my healing and on this journey of being single, like really single, like, it's a deal breaker for me. If it happens ever again, like, I just know for me personally, I won't be able to move past it because I've been burned by that in the past. But, you know, to each his own. That's your journey. Have at it.
Yeah. And it's great to have that awareness, right? I think oftentimes, like, we make those decisions in the moment, like, oh, I'm going to decide to stay. And then we're like, oh, well, I already made the decision, so I have to stay. It's like, no, you can change your mind.
You can change your mind. Exactly. Oh, this conversation is so good. All right, I want to get a few more gems out of you. So now I want to talk about, why do women struggle with reaching an orgasm?
Oh, so many things.
So many things. And before you even get started, I listened to one of your podcast episodes yesterday about orgasms. I had no idea there was more than 11 orgasms. Did y'all know that? Because I had no fucking idea. I only know two. Two ideas. So please teach us.
Yeah. So it all goes back to the mind, right? And I say this like all the time, and people are like, whatever. So I want to preface this by saying that I truly believe that every single person has the capacity to orgasm, because we all have the capacity to receive pleasure. And so orgasm, I think that we've kind of put it in this little box of like, it only looks like this, and it is very different for every single person. Every single person will describe it in a different way. And so I think it is very unique. We've been socialized, especially as women, that like, it wasn't something that happens. Like, there's still people believe that the female orgasm does not exist. And so like, we've gotten further along. There are more people that believe that it exists, that it's a thing. But what's happened in that is that we've started placing blame on external factors for us not orgasming, right? Like, I understand being sad, maybe feeling left out, frustrated, whatever, that you are not experiencing orgasm. But placing blame on a partner, placing blame on a penis or on a toy or anything else outside of you is not going to help you get to orgasm. And so I think that the most important thing is that we learn to relax. And I actually just did a TikTok video on this like a couple months ago that went viral. No one was even talking about the sex. They were talking about that they don't know how to relax. And that got me thinking, and I was like, not only do we have this socialization that this is like the golden thing to reach for, right? Is that like we are learning now, or we're being taught now, socialized to believe not only like not orgasm is good, right? It's like, oh, we want to orgasm because if we don't, then our partner feels inadequate. So it goes back to like the pleasure of the other person, right? Whereas you're focused on your pleasure and experiencing an orgasm, then you're going to be fine regardless, right? And so not only do we have that socialization, we think that like it has to happen, and it doesn't. So we're stressed out about it happening. And then of course, when we're stressed, then we're not as aroused, not as much blood is flowing to the genitalia. And so then we don't experience orgasm. I think a lot of it has to do with us not knowing our bodies, not being comfortable with our bodies, not knowing what we like and what we don't like. So there's like several reasons why we're not orgasming, but it definitely is possible. But I think it all ties back into relaxation. And many people in this world, specifically many of us that have been socialized as women, do not know how to truly relax. We say we're relaxing, but we're scrolling on social media. We're watching Netflix. We're watching Netflix while we're also on our phone. Like, we're not truly relaxing. We're just kind of like avoiding behaviors, right? Yeah. So we're avoiding emotion, just like someone comes home from a long day at work and goes for a glass of wine or a cigarette or whatever, right? You're avoiding those emotions and not truly processing them. And what I think is that we haven't truly learned how to relax. We're also taught that we're not supposed to, because then we're floja, or we're lazy, or, you know, we're bad moms, or, you know, what, bad wives, whatever it is. So we're told that we're not supposed to relax. We're not supposed to need rest. But that's factually inaccurate. We actually do need rest. We do need to learn to relax. Our brains need it to function. And so if we're constantly burnt out, then we're not going to be able to get as aroused or experience orgasm. And so it really starts with the mind again, and really learning how to relax. And I think if we're specifically talking about the Latino community, the women are taught, and it's even modeled, even if it wasn't explicitly said, we're always cooking something, we're always cleaning something, like we're always on the move. I cannot count a time that I've ever seen my mom or my tia sit down at a party. Like, it could be for 2 seconds next to the grill, like, and then getting up again, right? And so, and we weren't allowed to be bored, right? It was like, if I breathed bored, it was like, pues ponte a limpiar, right? We weren't allowed to be bored. Or the minute you sat down, not even the minute, the second you sat down, it was like, oh, ve por esto, or like, you had to be doing something. You couldn't sit down. You couldn't even relax as a child, right? Because you had to be up and doing things. And you had to be cleaning the whole house, even though it was already clean, like before you ask for permission to go anywhere. And it's a lot about lessons about like productivity, which tie into relaxation. And we're not taught how to relax. So then we wonder why we can't relax. And now when we try to relax, it's uncomfortable. So then we start scrolling on social media. We start watching TV. We start reading. We start folding laundry, like all these other things. So I think that it all ties back into creating this awareness about what we like, kind of the messages that we got as a child from our parents and from, you know, society, right? How we were socialized. And then also realizing like, how is that impacting your sex life? And why is it that you want an orgasm so bad? Not to say that you can't want it, right? But it is possible. But what are you making it mean right now about you that you're not orgasming?
I love how it like comes around full circle. Like I said before, all the shit that we deal with in childhood follows us into adulthood, and I can relate so much about the not relaxing thing. Like, bottom line, take the fucking naps, okay? Like, take the fucking naps.
Sit your ass down.
Yes. All right, a couple more questions. What are some things that we can do to improve our sex life? And how can we keep the spark alive for those who are in long-term relationships or marriages?
Yeah, I think getting to know your body, like the more that you get to know your body, and I think that people think this is like a one and done type thing. Like, first of all, our bodies are always changing, right? Like, so really just getting really familiar with your body, what is normal for you, not only for like sex sake, right? Like your pleasure's sake, but really knowing like if something is wrong, you're going to be able to advocate for yourself at the doctor, right? Like, no, this is not normal for me, right? Because they're going based off of like a generalized, you know, knowledge, which is like the best way that they can do it. But you need to know you. You are supposed to be the all-knowing being on your body, and so
everything starts and ends with us, y'all.
Right? Yeah. So really getting familiar with your body and what you like and what you don't like, and then I think as far as it comes to, and also learning how to like receive pleasure and just like be in like a pleasure state, and I don't just mean sexually. I think like you can get pleasure from like eating a bowl of like homemade food, or I don't know, hearing your best friend laugh at a joke you said, or whatever it is, right? You experience pleasure in so many ways. And so just really getting accustomed to allowing yourself to feel pleasure, even if you haven't done anything to quote unquote deserve it. I also think learning to relax is like that is going to be like revolutionary, and learning how to relax and be comfortable doing so. Like relax and not be looking around like, oh, I need to wash the dishes, or the baseboards are dirty, or my favorite, like I really need to clean my ceiling fan. That's like my go-to all the time. But really just like not thinking about your to-do list for a second and just allowing your mind to wander. Like it's okay to do that. You don't have to always be productive. And then I think as it relates to like with a partner, I think just having that open communication about what is going on, and just like what are your desires, because the way that I see it is there's like 3 sex lives involved. So it's a sex life of each individual if we're talking about a couple, so like 2 people, the sex lives of each individual, and then the sex lives of the couple, right? And so it's like you have your own sex life independent of your relationship, and then you have a sex life with your partner. And if you are non-monogamous, then maybe, or you're just dating or whatever, then you have a relationship with maybe multiple partners. And so really figuring out how that plays into one another. I also created an ebook of called Spice It Up con la Sex Coach, and it's totally free, so I can send you the link that you can people can access it. But it's basically just 69 ways that you can like spice up your sex life. Like you could just pick a random number from a hat or whatever. Ask your kid, because I know y'all are indecisive. So they're like, hey, give me a number between 1 and 69 and see what they choose, and then pick that and do that, right? And it can be applied to both like couples and yourself, and not because I have like the answers to everything, but it's really just a way to get your mind like going, right? Like sometimes it's almost like writer's block. Like once you get going, you're good, but to start it's really hard.
Is the hardest part.
And so these 69 ideas are just really ways for you to get your mind going and the juices flowing. And then once you're in that state, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna modify number 5 to do this instead, or my partner's not here, or maybe I'm single right now and I'm not having sex with, anyone but myself. So I'm going to modify this to do it this way, and really just getting creative, because I think we have this block of like, it has to be like a certain way, but it's like, you can do whatever the hell you want.
Yes. Oh, I'm definitely going to leave that in the episode show notes. There's so many more things that I can ask you, but I know I need to keep it condensed in a specific time frame. I just want to thank you so much for your education. I love this episode, and I can't wait for it to be released. I just want to ask you the questions now that I ask every single guest as we wrap up. So number 1, what's one of the hardest lessons you've learned as an adult?
Oh, the things don't have to be inside the box. I was very much like, it looks this way and it's square and it's, and now that I'm learning, I'm like teaching it to my clients as well. So it's still like this unlearning that like things can look any way that I want them to look. And what I define for my life is like mine, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's.
I mean, that's the perfect segue to the next part of my question. You're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast. So what's your definition of thriving?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's like redefining your life. Like in my mind, it's like my sex life, right? But anything, like redefining what things mean for you, and really just staying to what it is that you want for your life.
I love that. Love it. All right, go back to your childhood self, whatever age pops up for you. What's one piece of advice you would tell her?
Oh. Things aren't always what they seem.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
That's like a boom, mic drop. Yeah, I can definitely relate. All right, final question before you plug in how we can follow you on social media. What is an affirmation or a mantra that you practice daily, and why?
Yeah, el placer es poder. So for those of you that don't speak Spanish, pleasure is power. And so going back to what I said earlier, it's like we create power. So if you can think about, since we're talking about sex, I'll go with orgasms as an example. If you think about any orgasm that you've ever had, or for those of you maybe that haven't experienced orgasm, like the best sex you ever had, you had that experience because of you and your brain and no one else's. It wasn't the hand, it wasn't the person, it wasn't the dick, it wasn't the toy. It was you. And once you can really, like, I know you're hearing it now, but once you can really hear that and believe it and digest that into your system and your brain and really believe it, that is going to change everything for you.
Yes. We have the power, women. Are you listening? The pussy has the power, okay? Anna, this was amazing. Thank you so much. Please let my audience know, what are you working on? How can we follow you? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so I play in all the places because I like to do all the things. So you can find me. I have a podcast as well called Sex and Spanglish. It's on iTunes, Spotify, and all the other places I never remember. Yes. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok, just an FYI, but all the places, Sex and Spanglish. So it's Spanglish, not Spanish, Spanglish. Yes. And I am currently doing a 6-month experience for folks. So it's rolling enrollment. We start every 15th of the month. The very first one is going to be July 15th. But if you don't make it by then, you can come in August. We'll happy to have you. But it is a 6-month experience where we're going to deconstruct like all these beliefs that you've had forever. Like, well, mis papis me dicen, like, you know, all those things, right? And it's like, my parents told me, and it's like, but those aren't what you believe. Mm-hmm. And so really deconstructing, like, what are your beliefs versus what, like, you've been told by society or what you've been told by elders in your community, your parents, you know, whoever. Really deciding what it is that you want to believe. Also really focusing on, like, how those, holding on to those beliefs that aren't really yours, that are like your parents or whoever else, how that is impacting your life in general, but also your sex life. Really teaching you how to relax, like truly relax and not feel guilty and not feel anxious or like a lazy piece of shit, which is what I've heard multiple times in my comments, is that I feel like a lazy piece of shit for not, you know, doing something. So learning how to truly relax, learning how to like be in this space of pleasure, feeling pleasure, experiencing pleasure. And then as a result, like that's going to change everything about you. But then also like that is definitely going to impact your sex life. Of course, I'm a sex coach, so I'm going to be giving information about like sex and sexuality as well. But it really all starts with your brain. And like that's that's where the orgasm comes from, y'all, is the mind. Yes. So once you get that like straight, you're good to go. Yes. But it's really about getting rid of all that shame and that guilt that you've carried on from childhood into your adult life. And learning to have guilt-free pleasure, because that's very rare, especially amongst women. And so really solidifying that. And it's the reason that it's 6 months, some people are like, fuck, that's going to take forever, right? But it's because imagine, so I'm 33, right? So 33 years of like this socialization of, you know, the same thing, like feel guilty if you're sitting down, feel ashamed if you're having sex, like all these things, like it's going to take a little bit of time, 6 months, wink, wink, to deconstruct all of this and really solidify those new beliefs and values that you really want to hold on to and claim as yours. And so it's a 6-month container, and there's other women in there that are also going through the same shit. So you're not going to feel like you're going batshit crazy. Like, is it just me? Like, no, there's going to be other women in there dealing with the same shit. And when you see other people being coached, you're like, oh, fuck. Like, that's what I'm doing. It's so much. Almost, I feel like group coaching is almost better than one-on-one coaching because you get to see it from an outsider's perspective. You see yourself in that person, but you're not the one being told, like, hey, like, it's just you, boo.
Yeah, exactly. So, you don't feel like it's just you. Like, I love the power of community. That's amazing. Y'all watching on Instagram and listening here, thank you so much, Anna. You are just full of so many gems, and I wish this could be like 3 hours long, but you know, I don't want to take a... Yes, you'll definitely be back. We're going to definitely have more conversations all around sex. Once again, thank you so much, my love. I appreciate you. Yes.
All right.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. That was fucking amazing. Anna, you are fantastic. I'm going to figure out. This is going to come out sometime in the summer. So when it's out, definitely will let you guys know. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll check you out next time.
Bye.